Welcome to your next People Nerds webinar. I can see tons of folks streaming in. I feel like we've opened the doors on Black Friday, but instead of TVs and blenders, you get insights and community. How about that? I'm Ben, the person that you are forced to hear at the beginning. We're so very excited that you're spending some of your working from home, always socially distancing life with us. You are in Take Any Research Remote, a People Nerds webinar brought to you by Dscout. Really excited that you're here. We have a lot of great stuff. Okay, here is what we're going to be doing today. And again, these are big buckets. We're going to cover a lot of things, but we're first going to talk about the benefits of going remote. I'm hoping that some of you have either never done a remote research study before, or this will be your, you've done it a few times, and maybe you're advocating for budget, for spend for a tool, or you're trying to get buy-in from your stakeholders. We'll go over some of the benefits. We'll then talk about some strategies that you can use to translate your field work, your traditional research, again, whether or not it's qualitative, just your user research designs that might be happening in the field, how you make those happen in remote, doing something like this. And then finally, we'll close with use cases. So that's our agenda. We will, of course, leave lots of questions or lots of time for your questions. And that's enough of me talking. Actually, it's not. You'll have to hear from me for a little bit more. Here are our guests for the day. I am, again, moderator, Ben Wiedmeyer, and I'm pleased to have both friends and colleagues joining us. Emily Wurgler is a research lead on the studio. You've heard me talk about the studio before. They're our in-house skunkworks full-service innovation team. They regularly break Dscout because that's what their job is. They have to try to push it to its limits so that they can learn where we need to grow as a company, and they're also pushing their methodologies to the limits to really help customers. Emily has a PhD, as I do, so we'll be doing a lot more smart wording than Charles. I'm just kidding. Smart is Charles' middle name. He has a literature and theater background from Northwestern, so he can hang. And speaking of Charles, Charles is our other guest, a dear friend, someone who helped bring me along in the Dscout world. Charles sits on our customer success team. So Emily gets to work with lots of different methods to tackle hairy, ambiguous questions, and Charles has seen it all, both across verticals, industries, kinds of customers. He's worked with innovation folks, market insights people, product people, designers, and of course, UX folks. So these two people you can trust to have seen just about every nook and cranny of user research, and then specifically user research remotely. So Emily, Charles, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet. So happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here, Ben.
I hope that was an okay intro. Okay, cool. I'm going to check my phone because that's where my colleagues are letting me know that there is, the lights look good and the camera height is nice. How about that? Okay, cool. So with that, I'm going to take us through briefly some of the benefits of doing research remotely. If you are new to user research, you might also be new to thinking about doing your user research at a distance. And when there is some sort of modality or channel between you and the person, it might think that you can't quite get the empathy or the authenticity or the kind of data you need, but I actually think that there's quite a bit there that you can get, and authenticity is the first one. I know that in my research background, and I think Emily can speak to it in hers, I was asking often about sensitive topics like romantic relationships, breakups, dating, and even though I'm a rather affable person, I could feel or I could sense that someone was maybe guarding or masking what they were saying or filtering it through maybe social desirability. If you're out there and you work in an industry like healthcare or insurance, or you're asking about an experience or something that might be sensitive to folks, even if it might not be sensitive to you, the researcher, I'm wondering if you've ever had an opportunity or an experience where you feel like you visited someone's home and they cleaned up. Even if you told them, hey, don't pick up, I really want to see you in your natural environment, but they've cleaned up because they want to present well to you. They want to save their face. I think that one of the big benefits of remote research is that you are going to get unparalleled authenticity. You're going to see into their bathrooms. You're going to see into places that you weren't able to otherwise, whether it's the family dinner table or the store aisle. And folks feel very comfortable when they're talking to their phones. Whether you use Dscout or another platform, that they're participating, that this means research to them starts to melt away. We actually have coming out today on the People Nerds newsletter a whole series of research on COVID. And we trusted, or we are trusted with the data that our participants provided to us, because it's very sensitive and it's very hard hitting, it's heartfelt. We have folks who are being directly affected by this pandemic. And I think that the fact that they are able to interact with us through the phone makes them feel a bit more comfortable. So I check for that today in your inboxes. The People Nerds newsletter will have a whole COVID series called the COVID Diaries. And I think that's a really good example of the authenticity that you can get from remote research broadly. The next big benefit that you're going to see is, as I said, this exclusivity. Maybe you're a mobility or a transportation company. Thank you. Some love from folks about the newsletters. We really, really appreciate that. We try to make that content, we try to get that content and make it useful for you. If you're out there and maybe you study transportation or you study something that happens very fleeting, how are you going to arrange that you can meet with a person when they really need a thing and they go to your experience, service, or product to make it happen? Well, you can't quite do that. But with remote research, you can often set up, as Charles will talk about later, triggers or primes in such a way that you can get them to show you the kind of moments that you really want to see. And very often they're ones that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Whether it's shopping for frozen foods and then preparing that meal at home, or getting ready to go to work and what they plug into their car, what radio station or podcast they listen to, or do they listen to an audiobook. You are able to, because again, this is your field researcher, you're able to go anywhere the phone goes. And there are many platforms like Dscout and others wherein you don't even need a cellular connection during the moment then it's happening. You can have them capture the moment and then upload it later. So you really have unparalleled access to their lives. And if they can submit those moments safely, you and your design team or your products team can see things that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. I mean, again, going back to my research on dating and mating, I mean, I could sit in a bar and wait for someone to walk over to another person and then run over and go, "What are you doing? Do you really like that person?" Again, we get back to the bias and authenticity. But if somebody is on their phone and they're like, you know what, I'm going to send a message to someone and here's how I want it to land. Here's what I'm hoping it will do. I mean, that's unparalleled access. So it's exclusive, it's authentic. And then the last thing, we're hearing a lot about it as we, as we get more teams doing user research, is scalability. And this lets insights grow. Scalability is just the way for research broadly, or more specifically, qualitative research to grow and infect, well, that was the wrong word there, to, permeate through the organization across just your insights, market research, or UX world. If you use remote research, sharing is easier, socializing is easier, bringing in your stakeholders earlier in the process. Emily's going to talk about how because she's often dealing, and her team are dealing with big, thorny questions wherein there's a lot of buy-in from stakeholders and they really want to check in a lot. And if you're using a remote research platform or you're using some sort of mediated channel, folks can jump in, stakeholders, customers, or even other teammates can jump in and see what's going on. It not only brings empathy for the work that you're doing, but it scales the notion of human insights throughout your organization so that more people are like, wow, this is useful. I wish we would do more of this. It socializes what you do as a user researcher or a human-centered designer or thinker, and it hopefully gets more people involved. Emily, Charles, are there any other benefits that throughout your careers in this world of remote research you've noted, things that you've seen as a benefit of using research remotely specifically?
I would say generally that the speed at which you can conduct the research, the fieldwork period is a lot of times condensed. You're not having to go to multiple sites, especially for something like an observation. If you're in 1 to 2 sites for over a long period of time, but you're only able to collect a certain number of observations. With remote research, if you're doing a mobile diary study, you're able to collect dozens and hundreds and maybe even thousands of moments all across the country or the world in a matter of a week. And that to me is a huge benefit.
And I think too, the ease with which folks who are new to research in general, or for whom research is only a part of their jobs, the remote component is very helpful because you're not having to travel somewhere and spend all of the resources that you might have to actually speaking with people in person. doing that work remotely takes some of the anxiety out of that work, because you can have somebody like me kind of help you along on your journey and kind of teach you as you go, in a way that if you sort of were getting into in-person qualitative work for kind of the first time, it can be daunting, and it can be a huge problem if you kind of get out there and realize you don't have the resources you need because you're new to this. So it's a good way to learn too.
Those are great. And we're getting some questions in the chat about authenticity. Emily, Charles, can you talk a little bit about, because my background is as a social scientist studying sex. I've run focus groups, I've run surveys, I've run experiments. People are guarded when I ask them about sex. There is a slew of research which suggests that, and I think Eric has a really good point, that yes, I'm talking about people who are comfortable using a piece of technology. That's absolutely an assumption that I'm making here, that someone who is not only comfortable with a phone, but a smartphone that uses a mobile app. You're right, Eric. That is the subsample about which I'm talking to. There is a lot of research that suggests that computer-mediated communication tends to induce people to talk more authentically, to disclose more deeply than they would face-to-face. Now, you talking to a friend, certainly that disclosure is different, mediated versus unmediated. But again, I'm thinking about focus groups I've run. I have to spend 15, sometimes 20 minutes building rapport with a group of strangers and trying to get the strangers to sort of feel comfortable with one another. So Emily, Charles, do you have any examples or examples that you can talk about of that authenticity that you feel or notice in remote research specifically?
I'd say I agree with much of that. There can be a little bit of an initial hump as participants kind of get used to the idea of talking with the researcher in a very plain spoken way about things that matter to them. So there can be, I go through a lot of prep work with people running remote research on making sure to establish trust up front, that Dscout is a trusted research partner, or you as the person conducting research, you need their information exclusively for this work, and we're not giving it to anybody else. And as long as that sort of core understanding of trust is met, it is amazing how folks, once they kind of get up to speed on the process, how their defenses fall, because they're talking about things that matter to them in their own environment. So they're comfortable. They're not in some lab somewhere where they're recalling their experience. They're on their couch, and they can speak honestly, sometimes to an astonishing degree. So I very much agree with that.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. In my previous life as a, academic researcher, I was sitting down with people asking them about their religious beliefs and how that mapped onto their political beliefs. And I was a young woman, I was pregnant while doing a lot of these interviews, and I could sense that they were holding back because they had things to say that they knew probably wouldn't sit well with me. And so with with not just Dscout, but any remote tool, because they don't know who's on the other side of it, they don't know what they should hold back. And that's one thing that I notice a lot of times. Sometimes people, I don't think, even know there are humans on the other side of it. They think, when I'm messaging them, oh, you're a real person, you're not a bot. It's like, yeah, there are real people behind this. So I think a lot of the social desirability kind of melts away because they just don't know what would be desirable because they don't know who's behind it.
That's absolutely it. And I guess I should qualify for those of you new to remote research broadly, or Dscout specifically, both or Emily, Charles, and I all work at Dscout, which is a remote research platform that you can do remote research with. And so we have a smartphone app that people can use to collect moments in their lives. Remote research might just be over Zoom, or you might be using Gmail. There's a lot of different ways that we're going to talk about remote research, but by and large, our examples will come from our experience as being researchers at Dscout. And it's a platform based on an app wherein, again, folks can, and it has a desktop experience for moderated interviews, but by and large, I'm talking about the sort of smartphone mobile. And someone mentioned the Hawthorne effect, which I think is a really great thing to mention here to close out. The Hawthorne effect is that humans, by and large, modify their behavior when they know they're being observed. So, like workers in a factory being evaluated for their effectiveness and like their range of motion are going to change their behaviors. And so similarly, when Emily was asking about religion, or I'm asking about relating and Hawthorne, Hawthorne, Hawthorne effect. When we know we are being observed, we modify our behavior. The worst thing about it as a statistician, because I want to control for that effect, is I don't know how it's going to modify their behavior. I just know that it is, or rather I have a hunch that it might. And so when you are communicating to, as Emily said, like our participants, we call them scouts. Those are the folks who take part in the research projects. When they have that first message with Charles or Emily or anyone on their team, they're like, hey, you're a real person. How are you? This is so exciting. I'm looking forward to showing you how I shop for cars or what my grocery shopping habits are like. They like that connection. We are humans after all and like to be social with one another. So Hawthorne effect would be another one I would want to throw out there, that remote research can help tamp that down, because we are not physically aware of someone observing us. Now, I would throw out certainly that folks have various ways that they approach technology and whether or not they feel comfortable and safe just in general disclosing on technology. I'm sure that's a variable that changes things. But by and large, the three of us have noticed that folks are more authentic or feel more comfortable talking over an app. So I'm going to check the questions here. Let's see. What do we have here? Ethics related to asking someone to document their day as to whether or not they should do that out in the field. Yeah, so Erica, that's a really good question. And some of our customers have said that they're going to slow down their research because of concern of their customers. They don't want to ask workers in a retail setting or folks who might be going to retail locations to participate, even if the activity or the research that we're asking them is quote unquote easy. You're already going there to do something. Yeah, Erica, we've had a lot of our customers say, you know what, we're actually going to hold on some new research we were going to do because we just want to be considerate of either the research participants that we're bringing or research folks just in the world. Let me go to some other questions here. Like to know about analyzing qualitative data within Dscout and how to transfer the content. Okay, so Jeanette's got a really good question about using Dscout specifically. Jeanette, next week at this time, we're going to have a really in-depth walkthrough of Dscout. I think that might be a better time for you to, we'll drop the link for that in the chat. My colleague Matt will do that now. Matt, if you could throw that link in the chat. If you want to learn more about how at least one platform takes in the data and how you can make sense of the data, next week at this time we'll have a walkthrough. Again, it's not a sales pitch. It's just like, hey, researcher Ben walks you through the platform, and if you have any questions about how it works, that would be a good time to do that. So Charles and Emily will talk about how they analyze and think about data a bit, but we're not going to be showing the platform. This is more higher level how you would do remote research. So Jeanette, do sign up for that if you want to have a look. We'd love to have you. All right, so let's move on now to Charles, who's going to walk through some both Charles and Emily are going to walk through some strategies for taking your, we'll call it traditional by way of just in-person, face-to-face designs and taking them remote. Charles, take it away.
Yeah, so, if you or your colleagues, if you and a team, if you by yourself are tasked with a qualitative research project, and you are in charge of kind of understanding what strategic questions or what big picture understanding you must take away from this project. What are the most important things you need to understand to move forward in your business, with your organization, whatever it is. The first thing that the clients that I work with every day do, what many people in the field do, are write down a huge list of questions that they want answered. I work with people who produce physical products. I work with a lot of folks who work at big digital companies that produce digital products. And so they've got all these different questions about how changes to those products affect the user's experience. So just for the sake of argument, I think I'll use that kind of as an example. So let's say you've got a digital product and you want to make a bunch of changes to your app or to the mobile experience, let's say. And you want to know, do people like it better? Can they find what they need? Does this make you feel better when you use it? Or is it meeting your needs? When do you use it during the day? There's so many questions that you can answer when you're doing qualitative research on a product or a service. And it's really challenging to focus and think about what are the most specific things that what are the most important things that you need to figure out. And then on top of that, with remote work, it's important and it's hard to kind of put some of the agency of what specific questions you're asking in the hands of your participants. So here's what I mean by that. Instead of sort of sitting in a room with your participants and asking them each one of your specific questions, when you're doing remote diary work, you're giving them a set of directions and then setting them loose out in the course of their daily life. And so almost more important than the specific questions that you want to ask are, what cue or what trigger do you want to tell participants that they need to keep a lookout for? That's their cue. That's their it's their note. It's what they keep in mind throughout the course of the research work. That is when they should stop what they're doing, take out their pen and pencil, open the Dscout app on their phone, open Gmail, whatever tool you're using. That's the cue that they need to capture what they're doing, what their experience is in the moment while it's really happening, so that you can capture all the nuances about where they are, what they're thinking, who they're with, what they're feeling. And so when I talk about triggers, my eyes light up because it's such an interesting conversation and it's such an interesting thought experiment to go through. And if we can find the right trigger for your research project, so if we can go through the thought experiment of, okay, what will a participant in your study be doing or feeling or thinking when they most need to tell you about their experience? And when we have a good guess at that, let's put that into our research design and coach participants whenever you are doing X, whenever you are feeling X, whenever you are in the process of X. That's your cue, that's your trigger to capture your experience for me and answer a series of questions about what you're experiencing. And of course, those questions are important too, but if the trigger isn't right, then they won't know exactly when to talk to you and about what. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about the importance of triggers and kind of setting up your remote project for success. Something else that I think a lot about is after you have settled on a trigger, and let's say, let's use one for the sake of argument that I love using, and again, staying in the realm of a digital product. So let's say you've got a new app that you're getting feedback from participants on, and the trigger we've decided on is kind of action-based and a little bit emotion-based. A way we talk about it a lot internally is a highs and lows trigger. So whenever you're using this new product, but whenever you're using it and it's really frustrating you, or you're using it and it's really delighting you. So you've taken a huge amount of the legwork out of the analysis process for yourself, because now hopefully you don't have to bother with combing through hours and hours of data where people are just sort of talking about their lives and their usage, but it's not very concentrated and they're not talking with a lot of enthusiasm about whatever it is that they're talking to you about. You've tasked them with concentrating on moments of usage when they're engaging with your product or your service, but when they're really delighted by it and it's super meeting their needs, and you get to ask them a series of questions about that moment, or when they're really frustrated with it. And so what follows, of course, then is what series of questions do you ask? It's important to ask open-ended questions that allow you to get, deep context from your participants. So they get to either type with their thumbs or write it out or speak on video. That sort of data is rich and thick and gives you lots of nuance into their experience. But it's equally important to include smart close-ended questions. Sort of every time that your participant kind of hits that trigger and it's like, here's another moment where I need to share my experience. Not only am I taking a picture or video, or writing out longhand, however you choose to do it, but they're also answering close-ended questions so that you can filter on that data, so that you can sort of have participants self-code or auto-tag their own data and give you a real leg up on your analysis work that's to come, so that when you're thinking to yourself way later in the process, okay, wow, what trends am I seeing? I'm just coming through so much data. If you've got smart close-ended questions where you ask things like, on this occasion, in this moment when I'm engaging with this product, on a scale from 1 to 10, let's say, how are you feeling? From very frustrated to very delighted. So then, at the end of this project, every one of these little moments that you have from participants that they've sort of bundled up and sent to you are marked or tagged or coded with sort of their sentiment, whether they're really frustrated or really delighted, so that you can kind of go in and say, okay, let's just focus on all of our most frustrating moments and see what trends and themes stand out to us. Or let's focus on the moments where you're the most delighted. And then we can focus on trends and themes that start to stand out when you're exclusively looking at moments that participants have shared with you because they're meaningful to them, because their needs were being met in a delightful or a fun way.
Charles, we have some questions about triggering and not triggering, but using primes or triggers, and the participant can't capture what they need to in that moment. Can either you or Emily talk about when it might not be safe or ethical or possible for someone to capture something right in that moment? How have you all managed that with your customers wherein there might be a delay?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say that's definitely an issue. We often have to make a disclaimer like, don't Dscout and drive. Like, please don't do this while you're driving, even if it might be something that happens in the car. We often say capture it as close to the moment or as quickly after it ends as they can. And of course, this isn't perfect, but it's a whole lot better than 3 weeks after the fact. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you need to ask people to reflect on an experience they've had in the past, totally agree, Emily. At the end of that day is 10 times better than a month later. So I think it still makes sense to ask people to recall what they've experienced recently, but to still do it in this kind of moments chunked based way so that participants can drill down into what's most meaningful for you, and also are doing it more recently than they would otherwise. And if there was a header for this whole series of things I'm talking about here, I think it would be like moments-based remote research, right? So just to pause and to provide that framing in case this way of thinking about research is new to you. When you're doing remote research, I think another good way of thinking about that is moments-based research. So you're not trying to get everything at once. You're trying to find ways to trust participants enough to say, when things feel meaningful to you, that's your cue to tell me what's going on with you. Because I, as the researcher, have assumptions about what's meaningful to you, but I want you to be in charge. So when you hit a cue in your day where, this feels like something delightful or frustrating, or this is a step in a process that's challenging for me, or there are lots of different kinds of triggers, and my team spends a lot of time thinking about them. But the thing that they all have in common is they put the choice making in the participants' hands because they're the ones who know what's important to them.
Yeah, and that, folks, I really can't drive that enough. Like when I was doing research before I came to the remote world, to Charles's point, like even if you're doing something like an in-home, what surfaced is what you observe. You're the researcher. You're there probing, asking questions, running through prompts. And so if you're in a store, you're going to be the one that says, sorry, I have a very, very strong finger point, but you're the person who's going to say, why did you stop at this rack? Or what was it about this end cap? Or you deleted that app, why? And so it's, again, one way insofar as you, the researcher, qualified and expert as you are doing all of the earthing or the unearthing or the triggering of when it's right for someone to weigh in. I mean, just think for a moment if you were to just give, again, a trigger that gives boundaries and guardrails on someone. And it can go at different levels. It can be, we had some questions about prototypes. Emily and Charles have done lots of work with concept testing and prototypes, wherein we white label someone into an app experience, and they are targeted to go into a particular part of the app and try this thing. And so it can be very minute. The trigger can be try this new filter or add this thing to your cart, or it can be very high level, like show us moments when you're tired, or show us moments when you're feeling safe. And then we can use closed-ended questions to understand and open-ended questions to understand, are they using services in those moments? What do they wish they had in those moments? So it's it really is so impactful when you cede a little bit of control to the participant, because you don't know what you don't know, but you're going to find out when you use those triggers and give them more power. Thanks for letting me interject, Charles.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. And it's a great reminder that the line of inquiry that you can be engaged in can be early in the product development process. You can be asking people to come up with ideas about, when do you feel like you are taking good care of your pet dog? Show us all the moments when you feel like you're really a great dog owner. So it's like discovery. What kind of products and services are people thinking about? How do people talk about their pets? All the way up to very focused, very much later in the product development life cycle, try this dog food with your pet. Every time you feed this food to your dog, show us how it works, how much they like it, how it makes you feel, and then help us understand whether you'll buy it again. So, all the way from very fuzzy high-level discovery work to very specific prototype feedback work, whether it's digital products or real products. Triggers can work for you both places. And then kind of the last main bullet point for on this topic about kind of how to frame research when you're doing it in a remote way and in a kind of a chunked or diary style way is saving your whys, if at all possible, for your rich media. So if you're using a tool that enables you to capture video, save those moments for the why questions, because it is a common we'll call it a misconception of folks that I work with from time to time who say, give me as much I want as much video as we can possibly get. Give me mountains of video. And then at the conclusion of a project, you have that all on your desk. And suddenly you realize that the cumulative total of all the video you have is 3 days worth of video, and then you're really in trouble as far as the amount of effort it's going to take to watch all that video and pull out the insights and figure out what it all means. So if you save your why questions that try to get at the root of the beliefs and the emotions behind people's choices and their decision making and their choices, if you can save those for video questions, for rich media, it will really provide you with targeted, emotional, deeply in context, bite-sized bits of data that help enrich your understanding of their experience and provide this really lovely storytelling component to your findings.
And a brief plug, Emily's got some really good ones. A brief plug for the two people, I don't know how your videos are set up, but in mine, the two smart people are to the right of me. Yeah. Charles and Emily are both available. We'll give their contact info. Charles has a whole team, as does Emily, that work with folks on translating their work. I mean, that's why I brought them on. They do this better than anyone. So if we're not answering your specific question, whether it's a vertical specific question, like you're in healthcare and you're concerned about HIPAA, or you're in a hardware world where you're wondering if you can actually ship someone something. We've shipped refrigerators before, as well as all sorts of various wearable things. Like, they've seen it all. So we have people at Dscout and in People Nerds who are willing to help you and are around to help you if you don't want a sales conversation, but you want to talk to a researcher about what's possible. So don't worry, you will have lots of opportunities to chat with them. But Emily, before you weigh in on some of your going remote, I was hoping that you could touch on a question I'm seeing a few times, and that's with one vulnerable population, children. Have you've done research with the studio team on younger folks and children in particular? Can you walk through what that typically looks like? Because to this moment, we've talked about like adults who have smartphones and are going through these behaviors. Can you talk through what the approaches you and the studio team take for doing research with children?
Yeah, so if it's under the age of 13, what we typically do is really leverage the parents. So we get the parents involved from the very beginning, and basically they're in charge of answering those questions, capturing those moments, and capturing those videos, along with, as Charles mentioned, identifying those trigger points. Um, so we really bring them on from the very beginning, and we ask them to kind of serve as kind of not a researcher, but an in-between person who's kind of helping their kids capture those moments for us. And so that's with mobile diary study, that's typically what we do. Sometimes we'll follow up with in-person stuff if that's possible. But it's really about getting the parents and getting them on board so that they understand kind of what their role is and what they're supposed to be doing, and then capturing those moments for us with the kids.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. And we've got a ton more questions to get to, but Emily, I'm curious your strategies for going remote.
Yeah, so the first one I have, it kind of goes along with everything that Charles has said, which is there's a temptation in remote research, or in when you're trying to translate remote research, to just kind of ask all the same questions and rely on that retrospective type of question. That's really going to not leverage the value of remote research, which is really capturing in context moments. And so you want to make sure, like, yes, you have questions about a long journey, frame it so that you're capturing different trigger points and moments along the way. Obviously at the end, you might want to have some reflection questions where you say, okay, now that you've been capturing this stuff for a week, you notice anything different? Like, what are your overall thoughts? But really leverage what remote does best, which is capturing things as they are happening. So that's one of the things I would say, like, across the board, the best thing you can do is to translate your research into a way that can capture it as it's happening. And this is a way that you can also get kind of that observation, like a form of observation that you won't be able to get through interviews. So the next thing that I have on here, especially for digital products, is about screen recordings. Because you're probably not able to do lab moderated usability tests or really anything like that. Leverage screen recordings to see people interact with your product or a prototype live, not necessarily live, but as they're doing it. This can actually be, sorry, go ahead.
Please.
Oh, this can actually be better in a lot of ways because they're using their own device and you're watching them do it in their living room rather than sitting in a lab chair. And this, you may not be able to get to the exact same findings. Like, you won't say, oh, were they able to accomplish that task that I wanted them to do? Or, did this button make sense? So did it meet their expectations? No, you're not going to get to that. But you may notice more important things like, oh, they didn't even notice the button at all. Those are the types of things that you can kind of capture these kind of live observations through screen recordings. That's super valuable and something that I've been using a lot more in my own work, because you get a lot of selfie videos in remote research, which are really valuable for empathy building, but for the product people, the designers, the engineers, watching someone kind of blow through this really important feature that you thought was going to be this gold mine is, like, super powerful.
And I was hoping we could linger on that for a second because we've got a ton of questions about, really smart. We got some really sharp people attending this webinar. Tamara, for example, says that, like, mobile diaries are really useful for getting those touchy, feely, ambiguous, like, exploratory work. But Emily, just what you're talking about is what it seems like Tamara is also interested in. What about that doing data? So if you need to see, what people are doing and you're not so interested just yet as to why, have you or Charles any experience on, the digital experience example you just gave, wherein you could create either a screen recording question or have people record their screens and submit it to you. Are there other ways that you both have tried to tap into the doing sort of data? Great question, Tamara.
Yeah. So something that I've done at a previous job with remote research is a lot of like pain points around cooking or kitchen related stuff. And that's something that we tried a lot of different methods, but the best was, like, prop your phone up in the corner of your kitchen and just take a video of you doing this thing. Because those are, like, those everyday routine tasks. Like, it's really hard for people to identify pain points with that because it's just so routine. But having them, capture every time they make breakfast for a week, you tap into, like, oh, the spoon constantly flops out of the bowl and, like, flings egg all over the kitchen. Like, that's something that people are used to, but seeing it over and over and over again as they're doing it, it can be really powerful. So that's, like, saying, hey, set your phone somewhere, show me, as much as you can in 60, 90 seconds, whatever the time limit is, show me doing it. That's super, it's a great use of the tool.
And Charles, your why question for media, can you talk a little bit more about how, I guess, if you could respond to Emily's, and then we've also got some questions about that why for media, the kinds of media that you really like to use.
Yeah, I could talk about that all day. Emily, I think that's a great example. And in fact, I've become a bigger and bigger believer in, I think, what we call around here experience sampling methodology. Then you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not only where we're asking participants to kind of show us their cooking experience every night, to use your example, Emily, but we're asking them the same series of questions each night. Because it can be tempting to say, I have so many questions, I want participants to answer a different series of questions every day about all kinds of different things. But actually, if you're able to come up with a series of questions that participants can answer repeatedly each night, what feels, tell us about the tool that saved your life tonight, or tell us about the equipment you couldn't have made dinner without tonight, and why that is, and show us how it works. You're able to add this amazing rigor to your qualitative work because you can start to map out participants' experience over time and kind of trust your data with additional trust in your data, because you're collecting the same answers to the same questions. So you can compare fairly, where if you ask folks to use a spatula and ask a bunch of questions, and then use a mixing bowl, and ask a bunch of other questions, there's not a lot of comparison you can do. Does that resonate with that world at all to you, Emily?
Sorry, had to find my mute. Yes, definitely. One thing that we do that can be really powerful is, like, because they're answering the same set of questions over and over again, just the scale of that sample size gets to be a lot bigger. And of course, you still have 50 people, but 50 people with 1,500 moments and 1,500 data points can be a lot more powerful for your stakeholders who may be a little bit skeptical about qualitative and remote research.
Totally. There's questions at the top about how to use Dscout for analysis. And again, I would love to get into that. That's something I could certainly talk about all day, but my quant stats background, I love the reliability that what Charles and Emily is talking about brings. The diary, or if you have people checking in with you every day. If I'm a quantitative scientist, I want to know that I've done power analysis to ensure representativeness and generalizability, and that the effects that I'm finding are true and real and not by chance. And that's often due to larger sample sizes. And so with something like Dscout's diary platform or other diary or remote unmoderated methodologies, the data grows so quickly. I mean, Emily's point just right there. I mean, imagine if you had 30 people taking a screen recording video 3 times a day, a high moment, a low moment, and a moment when they wished something were different, and they did it for a week. Your data are going to grow exponentially such that the themes that you're seeing, or to pull back Charles's auto tagging, if you're asking about the section of an app that's causing a lot of trouble, well, you filter and you've got 1,500 entries, and you can see, wow, look at all the trouble spots we have from the settings page or the profile page or the basket that we're looking at. Again, you can leverage closed-ended questions times how much the data grow to not only feel more confident in the themes you're pulling, but you can get some light quant. I mean, at Dscout, we say a lot light quant because we have data scientists that work on our teams, and we need to honor their truly large sample sizes. But you might be someone who has quantitative folks as stakeholders, and the question you might get is, but tell me about the sample size. Well, you don't need to focus so much on the N if you're using a data methodology or a diary method wherein you've got 200, 300 entries, individual moments with a photo, a video, 2 open ends, and 7 closed-ended questions. That's a lot of data that you're giving them. Emily, would you want to close out your last one? I'm so sorry I got your, but just there was a lot of folks who were interested in that screen recording aspect. So let's close this out, and then we have a few questions on folks transitioning to research.
Yeah, so the last one I have in here is I think something that's used a lot in more traditional methods, which is the idea of homework before you go into someone's home. And so one thing that we do a lot, we do remote interviews, but we pair it first with a diary study where people are capturing moments of the thing that we're particularly interested in. And so number one, you are able to kind of, before you jump into those interviews, you have a foundation, like an understanding of what the landscape looks like, of the attitudes you're looking at, the behaviors, whatever it is that you're interested in. And secondly, you're able to get a bigger sample size at the beginning. Say you have 40 people who go through your diary study or show you moments along the way. Once you have that understanding of what's out there, you can say, okay, I need 5 people who exhibit these kind of behaviors and 5 people who do these kind of behaviors. And then you're able to pick the best 5 out of these 40 and go into an interview with them remotely. And that helps you kind of have a better understanding of kind of what you're getting into those interviews. And 2, you enter those interviews with a lot of rapport ready to go. You know what they've been showing you in their moments, and you can say, okay, you know, great, we have this thing, let's talk about this thing. This is really interesting, tell me more about it. And it gives you the quicker jumping off points, that you're not spending, you know, the first 30 minutes, hour just to understand kind of the landscape of that individual's behavior. So using like purely remote homework paired with an interview can be super effective, interesting, and along with just, instead of having a sample size of 10 where you have a lot of rich qualitative findings, you're able to supplement that with moments from 40 people.
Sorry, I was just writing. Shabisha had such a great question about some of the, I know I've talked about how, like, you know, even the best focus group moderator can't break through like smartphone qualitative. Well, Shabisha is talking about underserved communities, or those who might feel less comfortable talking to someone who they don't note as a community member, whether that's ethnic, SES, locational, regionally. And so I was just writing, I'll say it over live here. And I want to get, before we go to the next slide on use cases, I want to talk about moderated remote research, because a lot of folks might not be comfortable or yet ready to do a diary study. And so I think when you are doing a diary study, I know I've had success in having like a pre-introduce yourself activity, wherein, I mean, I don't take part in it as the researcher, but I'll message. Many remote research platforms let you message the participants. And so I introduce myself. I may have a welcome message that tells folks about who I am and a bit about me. It sort of marks who I am in the study. And so, Shabisha, that's a really good point. You may not be able to have the sort of shared, you might not be able to introduce yourself in the same way. I mean, you certainly won't. An email isn't the same as like, hello, I'm Ben, and I'm from this community, or I have this experience. But you can still do that in platforms like Dscout, wherein you can introduce yourself as Charles from blankety blank. I'm excited to meet and discuss with you all. And so I'm hoping we could talk, because that transitions nicely into a question we're getting a lot about, which is moderated research. So you're sitting across from someone via a screen and you're trying to ask them about their cooking habits or the favorite app on their phone. Do y'all have any tips or strategies or things to keep in mind when you're right there across from the participant, but there's a moderated channel between you?
I don't know if there's anything in particular. I've done a lot. I think I added it up this year. In 2020, I've done my projects. We've done 70 moderated remote interviews so far. So this is something I've done a lot lately. And honestly, I don't feel like the screen introduces a whole lot of barriers that don't exist in in-person stuff. In a lot of ways, it can be more comfortable. Like when you come into someone's home, there's like oh, my house is dirty, like my kids are running around crazy. Like I feel like it feels a lot more natural. And one of the benefits of you know, if you're going into a moderated interview kind of cold, you don't know anything about this person, yes, you definitely need time to talk about things. That introductory message is really good. You know, lighthearted banter, like any interview, is really nice to start it off. But additionally, having them do some sort of pre-activity where you're interacting with them, either whether that's moments or some other thing, really helps to like let them get to know you as a researcher and the types of things that you're interested in learning about. Because a lot of times if you come in cold, they have no idea, like, oh, this is a study about cheese. Well, what about cheese? Are you going to want to look in my fridge? Are you going to want to like watch me eat it? Like that can be nerve-wracking. So just giving them an idea through some sort of activity, like the nature of what you're interested in, I feel like really helps.
Yeah, just building on that for a moment, I think that's one way in which remote work may be similar to in-person work, in that an unmoderated activity first. So in the remote world, that would be some sort of diary activity first, can be good preparation for moderated work. I do a lot of work with researchers who do a diary activity and then pick their favorites, sort of the people who knock the diary out of the park and really do an excellent job, and say, these people, it is worth my time to spend an hour with each of them to probe further on their experience with cheese in this case. So many unanswered questions there.
Yeah, I've had, we're getting some questions about mixed modalities, or when you don't have the budget for a platform like Dscout, Google Hangouts or Skype or even FaceTime, anything where you can, I'm partial to the smartphone. I like that if you can get here, that you have a window into things you wouldn't otherwise. But I know I've run diary studies via email. You recruit participants how you need to. And then I would just have them check in every day. Or as Charles said, I give them an anchor where I'm like, I really would love it if you could. Now that could be a little more challenging because they have to fire up their email client and send me a message. But if you really don't have any budget for a remote research tool or platform specifically designed for this kind of work, email works. Certainly any sort of face-to-face video conferencing. Dscout, our moderated interview tool, automatically transcribes, which is a lifesaver. I'm sure Emily can say over those 70 interviews, it's really nice to have that thing auto-transcribe. But there are lots of platforms out there that will transcribe for you. And so you could leverage those at maybe lower cost than buying into a full platform. But think about how we used to do cultural probes back in the day, where we used to mail someone a package that had a recorder, a notebook, a map, and I would want to know, like, draw how you get to work and put X's on the points that are sort of a bummer, and squares where you're feeling really good. Like, you're trying to replicate that. And so there's a whole host of free productivity suite tools that you could leverage. You could use something like Trello or Excel to do your tagging. Again, Dscout has tagging built in, but you could just use Excel to tag your data. You get creative with what you have here. And I stress this so very much because qualitative data can really get away from you, per Charles and Emily. Like, you get hundreds of videos. Well, that's potentially 1,000 hours. Start with your end. What do you want to say? Do you want to be able to show themes with highlighted quotes and a video? Okay, what questions do I need to ask to get that? And you might need to start with what your client or stakeholder needs to see. If they need to see pain points in an app, well, then you're asking about the app. You're asking about how painful that part of the app is, and they might want to know frequency. So a diary study could be good because you could ask them to check in anytime over the course of the next 4 days that a thing is happening. So really start with your outputs. What do you need to say? We can talk about how great the data look all day, but at the end of it, you are going to need to go through it, synthesize it, and make sense of it. So do yourself a favor and think about what you need to say, and then build in time that lets you do that. Charles, you work with customers all the time who can sometimes bump into, well, let's just collect more. Well, we'll just collect more. What are some of the things that you say to them with starting with the output and working back?
I just send them straight to you so you can tell them just what you just told us, which is, think about your output, your due date, who your stakeholders are, what they expect, how long you have, and how many brains you're going to have access to make sense of your data. And then be your own advocate. And if you have 3 days to do your analysis, don't collect 3 weeks worth of data. Collect 3 days worth. It is better to have a tighter, more focused research project that you have had time to fully absorb than it is to do this large, sprawling thing and really only be able to hack through 25% of it by the time your due date rolls around.
Emily, do you have any thoughts on the constraining of your analysis period?
The other thing to note, definitely, you want to only collect what you're going to have time to analyze. But the other thing is, it's okay to leave some things on the cutting room floor. If there are things that have risen to the top that it's become over time become more clear, it's more important to your stakeholder, focus on that stuff. And leave behind the set of questions, or maybe a certain part that you just didn't have time to get to. It's not going to disappear anytime soon. You can get back to it later, but you don't have to look at every single open end and every single video to deliver great insights to someone.
Yeah, one of the benefits of using a platform is that the research becomes less precious. I know that, Emily, when you and I had to like do our dissertation data collection, we had to get it right this one time because the next however many months and years we were going to be analyzing that data. But like Charles is constantly, and I am constantly coaching our customers like, okay, well, let's just start small. Like you want to see usage moments, let's start there. And then we'll learn something because that's how the nature of insights collection. And then we'll do something else. We'll iterate. So another thing that I would want to append to my benefits of remote research is that it iterates kind of naturally. To what Emily said, you have a store of data. You might be working with a platform that will keep it for you, or you may have downloaded it so you still have it. It's not reams of transcripts and video files sitting around. You know, you have access to it. So if you need to go back and iterate, you can. So we are coming up on the top of the hour. Emily, Charles, do you have like maybe 15 more minutes to keep going through some use cases for folks?
Yeah, you bet. And I just wanted to show my diploma for my PhD, which is backwards, and it says Lauren, who's my wife, Charles, and Cooper Perry, which is our dog, are the coolest. And I just wanted to show off my PhD document just real quick.
I couldn't tell you where mine is. Emily, do you have yours framed somewhere? Are you a proper doc? Yeah, that's the real funny thing. Yeah, I have no idea where mine is. Emily has, I asked both Emily and Charles to go through and sort of give us their top use cases because we've given you ideas on benefits. We've talked about how we can translate it. Let's get to brass tacks, some real use cases that you can take away so that you can start doing remote research and making impact. So Emily, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so I try to limit my selection to things that will still make sense now. So they're not going to require someone to go into a store and show that experience. So the first one I have are IHUTs, or in-home usage tests. And this can be anything from a consumer packaged good, a pack of gum, to a smartphone, a smart home device, anything like that. So if you can ship products to people, and from kind of the beginning of that experience, the unboxing, those first trying, setting up a product, those first couple of times using it, to using it over the course of a month, you can follow them along in that journey through a mobile diary study or something like that. Ben mentioned the shipping fridges. That's an extreme example, but we do a lot of like small consumer hardware pieces that we ship to someone. You know, we recruit people who are interested in this product but maybe haven't pulled the trigger yet, send it to them, and just watch that journey unfold over the course of a few weeks or a month. And that's a really powerful way to do that. We've done that just exclusively through diary. We've also paired it with interviews. There's a lot of flexibility there, but it's really amazing to be able to follow that journey truly from very beginning through that, first month or so, to see what that experience is like. Pain points, delights, usage may peak at the very beginning and then it kind of drops off. Like that is powerful to see. And you can't see that when you ask someone 2 months after they bought it, what that experience was like. And so that's all different types of products. If you're not able to ship something, maybe you give them $50 to go buy it online and have it sent to them, and follow that journey along as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there. The second one that I have on here is just generally generative research. So you may have had your research stream shut down in a lot of ways. You're not able to do lab, you're not able to do in person. This might be a great opportunity to take a step back and do some more generative research remotely. And so what I mean by this is explore problem space, explore kind of what the opportunities are in a competitive marketplace. So you can do this longitudinally, have people say, okay, like Charles was talking about, set up a trigger. Anytime you use a social media app, or anytime you take a recording for social media, you choose a filter, whatever, tell me about that. And you can really understand and get some generative insights that aren't product specific, and maybe get some stakeholder buy-in to do this research now when some of your other research streams are on hold. And then the last one I had on here was just like online shopping journeys. Journeys is something that we do a lot because it's really powerful. Like being able to follow someone through the course of a perhaps month-long journey is really hard to do traditionally. And so this is a great opportunity. I have the feeling that during the quarantine, people are still doing online shopping. So you can ask people to start with the research process. Show me what websites you're using. Show me who you're talking to. What are you getting out of that research? What are the pain points? What are the delights? When they go to make a decision, what are those purchase triggers? What was the final set of considerations that tipped them over? Was it a sale that happened? Was there some sort of freebie along with it? You can really see as it's happening, as it's unfolding, what matters in that journey. And then through the end, they make a purchase, they get it. how does that work? And sometimes you have a lot of drop off. It's hard to predict who's actually going to go through and make that purchase. But even if you don't see who ends up, or even if half your sample doesn't end up buying something, you have an incredible trove of data for seeing people as they're moving through this journey. And so that could be with really any product, clothes, food, big consumer hardware, technology, stuff like that. So that's something we've done diary only along with remote interviews, and it can be super powerful.
And Charles, you have your Swiss Army or Nashville Army knife mission design, and mission is our research activity. Charles has been doing missions longer than just about anyone at Dscout, research activities, and he has come on this, that most things can be done in 3 parts. So Charles, you want to, we'll wrap with this, your 3-part do-it-all Swiss Army knife mission design.
Oh, you know how to tee me up, Ben. That's one of my favorites. So when you're almost, no matter what you're interested in figuring out, whether you're in a hurry, whether you have a lot of time, whether you're early in the product development life cycle, whether you're late, whether your product or service is digital, whether you're doing generative or evaluative research, you can usually find a way to make this work for you, or at least it's a terrific unmoderated remote research design to get you started, to give you a place to begin your conversation around what the trigger should be for your participants, how long your project should take, what the most vital insights you want to take out of your project are going to be. And it's not rocket science. It's an intro interview. It's a diary study style activity, and then an outro interview. In Dscout parlance, that comes down to a 3-part mission. So that first part, that first activity, is where we kind of build out the persona of your participants and ask them a single series of questions about how do they typically behave? What are their general feelings and predilections? Getting to know them, understanding what's important to them, what their typical thoughts and behaviors are around what you're curious about. And then a second kind of central activity where you take advantage of one of these many techniques we've been talking about. You either ask them to capture moments of frustration and delight. Maybe you ask them to capture steps in a process. Maybe you're stuck. Maybe you and your team or your stakeholders or your boss or your the folks that you manage are just stuck on an issue and you just need to get unstuck. Maybe you just need your participants to come up with some ideas for you. Maybe you just, you need to crowdsource the idea factory a little bit. So you can ask them to come up with multiple ideas. You can ask them to inventory things that they own or things that they think or products they use. And then after, whatever that central task is, an outro survey. And this is super helpful because it helps jumpstart analysis for you. You can ask participants, what made the most impact on you? What did you learn from this remote research engagement? What surprised you? What are your takeaways? You're not guaranteed that their takeaways are going to be yours, but it's a really interesting jumping off point to kind of outsource that component of your sense making to at least bring your participants in on that conversation and see what they think they learned. And that's a tight, dependable way to kind of start a line of inquiry almost no matter where it is.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I have seen that work so many times wherein participants are doing a thing over the course of a few days and stuff bubbles to the top. They never thought that they never used this part of an app or that they never thought they needed A, B, or C. So Zoe, why don't we go to the last slide? I want to get the folks who are still here, the info and contact information for Emily and Charles, who I cannot thank enough for your time and just a tiny bit of your brilliance. These are really smart folks. Emily and Charles have been working in the remote research space for a minute. They can help you, or if they can't, they know someone who can. If you're interested in seeing Dscout, those questions about analysis, the questions about self-tagging and transcriptions and auto-tagging, we will walk through that next week, specifically looking at healthcare. So if you are someone who is interested in or works in the healthcare space, we're going to talk about all about how you can do remote research with patients, with providers. Maybe you're a clinician or you're a device provider. Wherever you are in the healthcare space, we will have a spot for you. The registration link is in the chat. Emily, Charles, thank you so much again for some of your time. I hate being socially distant from you both, but I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks
y'all.
for coming in and listening, everybody. Really
Yes,
enjoyed it.
thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.